We are so glad you joined us today to get centered. But we have a disclaimer. Being centered really is more of an aspiration than a destination. This is a vodcast where we'll be discussing all things mind and body, mental health, physical well-being, parenting, marriage, healthy touch, anger and how to handle it. What is integrative medicine? How do I meditate? What are we learning from COVID in this quarantine experience? Where do we go from here? You have questions on these topics, and we ask those same questions ourselves. So this isn't a vodcast full of answers. It's one full of discussion, because we're going to tell you right now we do not have all the answers, but we do love a rich discussion and hope you do too. We're Leela Scott and John Price, the founders of the Center for Healing Arts and Sciences, and this vodcast is hosted by our amazing team, which is comprised of an integrative group of therapists offering individual, couples, family, depth therapy, and offers support groups for men, women, teens, young professionals, and others. Chinese medicine practitioners offering acupuncture, herbal medicine, food therapy, lifestyle advice, and last but not least, our mindfulness meditation and spirituality guide. Be sure to reach out to us to let us know other topics you'd like to hear us discuss, or to let us know if you'd like to work with our integrative team. We are here for you and offering virtual care as well as home delivery of wellness self-care packages during this time of physical separation. Give us a shout at 713-526-4444 and be sure to follow us on social at Center for HAS. And now, please enjoy the show.
Shh. Oh boy. That will be the way we start. So welcome to Get Centered. Welcome back, folks, to Get Centered, where the team at the Center for the Healing Arts and Sciences comes together and talks about all kinds of different topics. And we're excited to get into today's topic. Nat, you're going to kind of lead the way a little bit as we talk about relationships and other related attachment items. Good to see you all. Thanks for joining us today. And if you're tuning in for the first time or you have repeated your viewing of Get Centered, be sure to hit the subscribe button and also the notification bell. Get all those notifications so you know when new sessions or episodes are out. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Hi, folks. Take it away, Nat.
Yeah, so today I would love to talk about bids for connection, intimacy, relationships. As a marriage and family therapist myself, I like to integrate a lot of information that I've learned through the Gottman Institute. They're a great resource for anyone who's looking on just, again, being closer to their partners. However, I do want to extend that message and say that a relationship is a relationship, right? It's connection, it's vulnerability, it's affection, it's intimacy. So the topics that we discussed today can also apply to how we treat our kids, to how we relate to our family members, our friends, because again, at the end of the day, it's about how we're understanding others, how we're perceiving them, and how, again, we're being a little bit more patient and in tune with ourselves and what's necessary for that kind of feedback source. So in terms of that, I like to start off with, how do we build trust and safety? People usually kind of jump to saying that that means that we're being loyal. That means that there's no infidelity or affairs, right? There's no talking about each other behind each other's backs. But really what it comes down to is making a bid for connection. And what that means, it's an attempt from a partner or any person in general for attention, for affirmation, affection, or any kind of positive connection. And there's 3 ways we can respond to these bids that we make. And usually they're unconscious. If somebody, let's say, makes out a loud sigh, we can turn towards that and acknowledge it and say, hey, are you tired of something going on? Do you want to talk about it? So that's a positive connection, right? Because we're noticing and we're recognizing and we're responding to it. Again, same situation, somebody sighs, we just ignore it. That means that we're turning away because either, again, we're choosing not to acknowledge or we just totally looked over it. And the person who did make that sigh might feel ignored and then internalize that experience and get frustrated because they're like, what the heck? I'm trying to be obvious about this and you're not picking up on the hints. Finally, there's turning against, which a lot of people in tumultuous relationships usually engage in. And that means either rejecting it, being argumentative or belligerent. So that means we would like turn at our partner and be like, that sigh was so loud, like shut up. God forbid, right? I would hope that no one gets that angry about a sigh, but it gets to that point, right? And when we get to that point, it's because there's just this constant lack of acknowledgement. There's this constant lack of turning towards. So I'm curious what all of y'all think about that in terms of, again, being just more present in the moment, turning our attention towards and really responding to the people we engage with. How is that presented in at least your clients and their relationships?
Well, first, I have a curiosity. The middle point you made around if somebody sighs, with that, there's sort of an assumption that it's the partner's responsibility to check in, which, of course, when we're in loving, caring relationships, we do want to check in. And I'm curious how much onus is on the person sighing to speak up and say, I need to talk about something.
Mm-hmm. And it goes back to that original, I think, response, right? That was their attempt. Again, I'm not saying just a regular sigh. I'm saying like that intentionality of, hey, I'm making something, trying to make it aware for you. Like that's my extension of a flag or again, olive branch in terms of I hope you notice. Because again, we're going to miss opportunities, but when it's something that happens consistently, that's when it becomes an issue.
Yeah. Well, that brings up sort of the nonverbal cues, right? Just being really in tune with each other's, what's not being said.
Absolutely.
And you're really talking about I mean, I like that question, Leela Scott, because you're getting into assumptions that we have and where we come from historically, like how we were attended to or attuned with or not, and how we carry those out. And I think my thought, Nat, as you were talking, was how justified people tend to feel for the way in which they experience whatever. I mean, you know, we hear all the time. I read this meme this morning about, you know, what is happening when somebody calls you too sensitive, and how that can be pathologized. You know, somebody not being able to vocalize something, but also when we're caught up in a complex, we're by the very nature of the definition of complex, not conscious of what we're doing. So we're acting out certain patterns. And I think the thing that you're saying that really clicks with me so much is that part of the relationshiping is about seeing beneath or behind the behaviors. And if you're conscious and able, like if you're both in complexes, you're in a fight, or you're both withdrawn. But if your partner is having some issue and they're playing out some pattern, and you're able to be conscious and say, hey, tell me what was going on behind that, and to be there and present, I think that's an expansive and connecting moment, as opposed to, you know, a disconnecting moment.
Yeah. And it's definitely twofold, right? Because in one sense, if somebody's lashing out, it can feel personal, right? And it's hard to almost like dissociate from that and read between the lines of validating that person and trying to empathize and understand what's bothering them. But Leela, I'm even thinking about what you're saying, like how about the partner who's giving, right? Who's making out that bitter connection. There's also ineffective ways of communicating, right? Like we can criticize, we can attack, we can get defensive, we can shut down. And all of those things, again, inhibit that potential for connection because we're pushing the people away through what I want to say are ineffective, right? We don't necessarily want to call them unhealthy because it could be a survival instinct, right? It might feel necessary at that time. But again, I mean, there are absolutely ways that we can engage in stuff where we want that connection, but we end up doing the exact opposite of what makes somebody pissed off and shut down.
I think about it like the playground. Like, I think it all comes back to the playground. You know, the kid who pulls the girl's hair because they think that that's like a way to express love, right? It's like, well, why would you have thought that that was a good way? You know? But you know, sometimes we're just doing our best. I think about attention is love. I think John, and we're all kind of talking about that in that giving of yourself and just really just being present. Actually, like not listening so that I can rebut, but listening actively, which is I think missing from a lot of relationships. My own, you know, I'm working on it too. It's not like I'm like above this, but a big part of the work is this person is going through something. How do I witness them fully and really try to understand what is going on with them? What's the like, and helping them, right? In a relationship is helping them to surface sometimes those the complexity of what the story is that they're telling in this moment, because they may not be even conscious of it. But if I start to ask the question and I'm witnessing and I'm really like curious, then that's the same work. Like what I'm talking about, it's the same work when I'm working internally, and it's the same work when I'm working with a person sitting across me. It's like it's like instead of assuming I know myself, instead of assuming I know this person and all the assumptions, it's let me see and let me be really curious and pay attention. And in that attention, that's where the kind of the repair is done. And it's not like, oh, you're like, you fixed it, it's done. It's like, okay, and tomorrow again. But you can build momentum though. You can build momentum. That's kind of that's what I've been thinking about. There's a lot more thoughts there, but there's also the fear, right? Like we get like, it's so vulnerable to do that. You have to have such a level of trust to express, hey, I'm scared about, you're not paying attention to me, and I sighed earlier, and the story I'm telling is that you don't care about me anymore, right? Oh man, now I want to fight. you know because you don't care and you're not taking my side and you're not coming, it's so it can become a whole story, and so surfacing that, having the base of a relationship to do that. I'm curious what your suggestions are for getting to that place of where you can keep coming back to it, and if you suggest like regular check-in times without it becoming like rote, or without it becoming like, oh, we need to check in, and it's like, oh god, here we go. Like without it spinning out of control.
Well, it's funny, right? I know you had mentioned that sense of, vulnerability and trust, but that where it goes back to those opportunities of turning towards, right? If we're consistently being as consistently as we can, right? But acknowledging our partner, again, being present, validating, showing them that we're paying attention, those types of difficult conversations are a bit easier to manage because you already recognize that that person is attentive and positive towards you, as opposed to, again, right, every time we ignore, every time we get frustrated. I like to kind of call it like an emotional bank account, right? Like successful couples, ones that turn towards each other, have these positive interactions, they're in a surplus, right? They're doing great. However, most people on average, at least the ones that unfortunately I see in counseling, right, are maybe in a neutral state or are in a deficit. Because anytime that we have any type of conflict, right, whether it's a fight, it's an argument, it depletes us, right? We become more negative. And so anytime we try to have a positive encounter or kind of, again, make an apology, if we're already in such a severe deficit, it only brings us a little bit up out of it or towards a neutral state. And unfortunately, when we're neutral, we fluctuate a lot, right? Because sometimes something's good, but then the bad thing like brings us way back into that negativity again. So in terms of that, again, that trust, that vulnerability, that intimacy, we need to really work towards, again, being present, focusing more on admiration, affection, appreciation, gratitude. I know a lot through COVID, we started talking a lot about that concept of gratitude and appreciation, and everyone got kind of annoyed and like frustrated with it because we're like, okay, we get it. We need to be grateful. But truly, I mean, same thing. If your partner is being vulnerable, reaching out to you, expressing their wounds, are we going to attack them for it more? Are we going to say like, wow, like, thank you for opening up to me. I know that was difficult. Or, I can hear that you're really frustrated with me. Let's try to find some kind of solution or work this out so that it doesn't happen again. It's about that openness, I think, to direction, and also openness of hearing feedback as well.
I mean, I think it also, I also think that it brings up the point, like, are both parties present? Ariel, kind of like what you were going into. Are both parties present here, right now? I mean, I feel like sometimes we all are kind of going through the motions, especially with like COVID going on. So it's like, okay, how do I get through this next hour, this next day, this next moment, so that we don't, necessarily get into another argument or like as passive about it. I think sometimes when we kind of get into it, it's like, okay, at the end of the day, I really don't want to argue with you, but I'm going to do these little things that want to show you, hey, I want you to be there. I need you to be there, but not necessarily go about it effectively. On the other hand, yes, I think that relationship is important with the other person, but I also think it's so important with ourselves. Kind of like, okay, why are we getting upset at the other person? Are we upset at the person, or are we upset at the situation? And how are we showing up for ourselves in the moment? And how are we being patient with ourselves? Because I think that if we kind of keep jumping to, a platform of, okay, I need a rebuttal because that's the only way I know how, is this what I really want?
Right. Well,
Yeah.
To that point, what I think is so important, I'm really trying to work on this myself in all of my relationships and trying to hold the people around me accountable too, is that if I come to you, Gia, and say, you just really pissed me off, you did X, Y, or Z, it's a hard start attack. This is going to be a fight. But if I can say, Gia, I'm noticing that something just came up for me. I'm feeling irritated. When you said this is how I started to feel. It sounds so one-on-one, but oh my God, is it hard to do? But with that kind of a start, I'm owning my feeling. It is mine because I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. You probably didn't mean to irritate me.
Right.
And you have an opportunity to say, oh, interesting. Well, no, I didn't mean to irritate you. I'm sorry, and here's where I was coming from. It's a much quicker resolve, and we're not layering the attack, the accusation, etc. It's just so much harder to recover from the first thing.
I think the big part of it is that ownership piece. I mean, whether you're a kid, whether you're an adult, whether you're a senior citizen or whatever, a dog, cat, whatever, it's really that ownership piece of, how am I responsible, accountable for everything I say, everything I do, without expecting to have it right here, right now, when I want it, how I want it, and why I want it. I think that if we don't take ownership within the relationship with, first and foremost, ourselves, so that we can practice the mindfulness piece, the piece on what's going on with our body, and then after that relationship, I think it's, somewhat of a trifecta even. It can really kind of misconstrue how we want to present ourselves to everyone on the outside.
I think that's such an important point in terms of the self-awareness piece, because one thing that happens, and with often I see people and clients trying to meet their partner's needs, thinking that that's what it means to be a good partner, a good spouse, but ignoring their own, thinking that they'll fix things if they can meet the other person's needs, while at the same time, if their needs are not feeling met, they're sitting on a tremendous amount of resentment that sort of poisons the whole process. So that self-awareness piece and an awareness of family patterns, and when John was talking about complexes, that's just a fancy Jungian word for say, how do I get triggered? And when we talk about the unconscious, it's how am I on automatic pilot? What are my automatic pilot things that this is the way it worked in my family? So, I'm assuming that this is the way it's supposed to work here. And that can be in a positive way or a negative way. So that awareness of where we're coming from and what unconscious attitudes we're bringing is really crucial.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the piece, is we do have our histories and we do have unconscious aspects of ourselves. And when we're in the process of self-discovery, we collect a little bit more of that awareness on the daily. And so being careful that we don't fall into the trap of, well, this is just who I am. So we're going to have this fight 400 times during our marriage. You know, we get to move through and we don't have the same fight over and over again. We learn, right?
I'm glad you had to say that question, like, we learn, right? Because I think there's always that accountability, responsibility piece of what am I taking away from this? What's triggering me? What can I do about it? What can I learn, right? Going back to that own line of questioning rather than, again, interpreting it as it's everybody else's fault and not mine, right? Because there is always that sense of, you know, can I be improved? Can I be more mindful? Can I be more present?
So Nat, what do you think about the statement, my feelings are none of your business?
Woof. Oh my goodness. Well, I hope that's not true. Because again, if we're in relationship, that means that we're connected, right? We're establishing that relationship to care, to be open about it. Because again, if my feelings are my business, then I don't know. To me, that means we're justifying our behaviors, right? If I'm pissed off, then that means I could just scream and curse at people and not care how they respond.
But that's actually getting to my point, which I think is interesting, because there's a difference between what's interior and what's externalized in the form of behavior. And so, because I'm completely with the fact that if my feelings then transform into a behavior that is, whether it's passive aggressive or it's straight up passive or it's aggressive or it's, you know, neutral, there are meanings that will show up in the relationship. But there's also something that I'm just thinking about fears that people come into a lot of times in therapy about relationships. And I'm trying to get at that feeling of being overwhelmed or engulfed and kind of the loss of identity that people feel like all of a sudden, am I having to like, you know, give up everything and be accountable for every thought, every feeling, every image, every, you know, are the dreams that I have at night, is that fair game? You know, if somebody has a sexual dream or something with somebody outside of their relationship, is that something that shows up or should be talked about in the relationship? So I think I'm probably meandering around this idea that there are so many different theories in relationships in therapy, whether you're in the Gottman world or the Schnark world or the EFT world, you know, and that's all a way of saying that there are different typologies that we have, and that we can kind of pick a typology of a particular relationship way of being and be pretty affirmed, you know. So if it's my side, you need to be responsible for my side kind of thing, or the alternative is I'm totally differentiated and I need to be completely responsible for everything that happens in me, and I need to take ownership of the way that I behave. I think that it can get kind of confusing for folks to not only figure out more about their own typology, but also hold themselves accountable to other typologies that exist in kind of relationship theory.
I always like to preface any type of relational work, whether it is with a couple, with a family, even with individuals, right? We're not trying to change a person. We're just trying to change the behaviors. Because like you said, it is so different in terms of what we're presenting and doing and who we are on the inside.
So what do you see, and this is a loaded topic, what kind of differences do you see between men and women and in therapy?
Come on.
Ariel, your face is good.
Why? All right, hold on. Let me pull this down.
Place hand grenade A in left hand as illustrated in diagram B. All right, got it. Hold.
All right, here we go, folks.
Yeah. Roll up your sleeves, folks.
I mean, to be honest, I think maybe this might sound a little too politically correct, but it's hard for me to identify what's more gender specific, because I've truly seen presentations in both, right? I think a lot of times people say that, at least men, and I think we've talked about this in terms of depression, right? Like with men, it's a little bit more like agitation, irritability, anger. However, I've seen that just as much in women, right? If let's say if their partner cheated on them, let's say it's the woman, right? But again, I've also seen the reverse. I do want to make that note. But in the case where the husband cheated on the wife is gonna let him know how much she hates him. and vice versa too, right? Like if the husband feels like he's being ignored or not attuned to, and the wife is completely distant, that same presentation will occur. So to me, it's, I don't know, again, maybe it's because I'm too still new into my practice, even though I've been working for about like 4 to 5 years. But again, I've just seen presentations in both sides because it's circumstantial, right? It depends on what their previous experiences, what they've acknowledged. A lot of times I find that men are a little bit more worried about being judged for being sensitive, even though they can be a lot more sensitive than their partners. And then there's that sense of like, is there something wrong with me? Like, again, is this a gender specified role to have feelings?
Well, that actually gets at a follow-up question, which I think is more to the point, which is, how do I ask? What kind of biases do you see that people walk in with about gender that informs the work in relationship therapy?
Mm-hmm.
And you're kind of getting at it there, I think.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of biases, I think a lot of that is more cultural, right? Of expectations of roles and chores and responsibilities, right? Like typically, I mean, I have seen this a lot in Hispanic cultures, in terms of wanting the woman to be more of the cooker, the cleaner, kind of household stuff, whereas the man is more of the breadwinner and kind of leader of the family. So I think in that sense, and again, I mean, I think that's a little bit more cultural, I mean, outside of Hispanic communities as well, but that's a main thing I've noticed in terms of, again, at least gender roles, especially with child rearing as well, like focusing on who's the one who should be helping to take care of the kids, taking them to school, packing lunches. Again, it depends on the work situation and whether we have dual career families, if we have a single career family with somebody as a homemaker.
Yeah, without a
Yeah,
doubt.
and
Oh, go ahead,
go ahead.
Eddie.
well, we talk about the magical other, and we often get into relationships for what our partner gives us, and really it's about what we're lacking, that we're seeking in someone else versus seeking it in ourselves. And you know, when that person turns out to not be the savior of our relationship, there's a lot of strife there. It's really about, all right, we can figure out what we need and who we are, we'd be a lot better partners, I think.
Yeah. What I was going to say is that we're here in this era of working closer and closer to male-female equality in the home, in the workplace, and we don't have a playbook for this. You know, many of us grew up in homes that were set up the, you know, old-fashioned way. And so here we are, modern marriages, modern couples, really figuring it out and subconsciously, unconsciously falling into some of the old traps of how it was done before, and then maybe silently resenting that there's not a different way that we're doing it in our own marriages, but maybe the conversation hasn't been explicit enough. It's an assumption. Okay, I thought we were going to share all of that, you know, so, but to go back to that trust thing that you brought up initially, I mean, yes, that trust of course can be broken with infidelities, but trust can be broken just by having an assumption that you thought this was going to be an equal thing, and that's not how it's carrying out. Or you said you were going to do this and you didn't do it, and that happened 20 times, and now I don't think I trust you're going to do it. I may know for sure you're not going to cheat on me, but if I don't think I can rely on you, that's still a break in the trust, you know?
That's where I love, if you guys haven't read it, or again, to our audience, The 8 Dates by Julie and John Gottman. It talks about different conversations we can have in our relationship to make it stronger. And one of them is trust. And I love that you brought up, like, what does trust actually mean? Everyone has a different definition of it. I actually had brought that up with my own partner the other day because I was flipping through the book and I was like, let's see what we could do tonight. And that was actually the topic we had. And that was what he brought up, is dependability, knowing that I can rely on you and knowing that you're there for me no matter what the circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that Leila Scott and I were just listening to this Esther Perel, Dax Shepard conversation. It was really good. And part of what I'm noticing that a lot of these relationship folks are putting out there, Gottman's got it, Esther Perel's got an intimacy questionnaire. You know, it's these tools that they're using to generate conversation between the individuals in the couple so that they can kind of blame the worksheet. I mean, Gottman's got this really cool resource. It's a card deck it's an app you can get. And it's kind of a way to have conversations or ask questions that you may not feel as comfortable asking. You know, and I think that's really important, or it seems to be a really important theme that most of these folks are like, you've never talked about, you know, what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman. You know, what was it like when you were a boy or a girl or, you know, an early childhood, how that showed up. How does gender play a role? How does sexuality play a role? What kinds of conversations did you have when you were younger about trust and sexuality and effort and so on and so forth? We kind of bypass those really necessary conversations, and hopefully the therapy is really about providing a place not only to play through the wounds that have happened in the relationship and then the wounds that we carry with us in our history, but how to have conversations that we just don't feel comfortable enough to have. And I'm wondering, is that in your therapy that you do with couples, what's the process tend to be like? I mean, because somebody comes in with like a rupture, I'm assuming, and then how does the therapy tend to go?
So it's funny, that's kind of been a theme these past 2 weeks in a lot of my sessions, because I've been seeing a lot of new couples and they just want to jump into the mud and dirt right away. And I say like, whoa, let's take a break there. And they're like, what do you mean? How are we going to do therapy if we're not talking about the bad stuff? And this is like the most simple way I can describe it. That's complex algebra. We're right now just focusing on basic math, 2 plus 2, right? And that means first learning those tools of how we can actually do active listening, right? Like summarize, listen, clarify, validate, some of those beginning tools, recognizing what the 4 horsemen are, when we can identify them, when we can take a step back. Because once we actually have those more effective tools in terms of, again, how we can behave and interact with each other, then that sets a little bit more of that safety to be able to talk about those really complex, vulnerable, hurtful situations. Because if we don't have that foundation of how we can even speak to each other, we're just going to go back into those disruptive patterns, because we're going to keep criticizing and attacking and defending ourselves, because again, we're still not in that place to have the tools to be open-minded and really hear. So for me, it's kind of like the first beginning stages are more kind of like psychoeducational, teaching a little bit more, again, me giving information so that we can really delve into that deeper stuff moving forward.
And wouldn't you also just to remember why that person you were in good space with them when you first got to, got to remember we can get in a headspace where all you see is just what's going wrong. So even the bids for connection are missed or what, so just going back, reminding the couple that there was a reason they got together and there's some positive attributes,
Oh yeah, that's funny. Always my first couple session is focusing on highlights and strengths, because again, right, whether we're together 5 years, 15, 20, there's a reason we chose each other, and we need to remind ourselves of what actually works and has been effective, right? Because we need that, again, that foundation of fondness for each other to carry us through.
It brings up a question about, this is a bad language, sorry in advance, because I'm going to talk about solutions, but everybody goes to therapy, couple therapy, because they want to overcome whatever issue they're bringing in, right? But do you notice when you have a quote successful therapy with a couple, is the solution to their issue what they imagined it to be at the beginning?
Never. No.
Why? Say more about that.
Well, because again, I think there's these gridlocked issues that we can have, these perpetual conflicts. Some things might not be resolved. Sometimes we genuinely have to agree to disagree, right? There might be some things we can overcome and fix, if you even want to call it fixing. But to me, fixing is, again, comprehending, listening, understanding that person. Because again, if we're more so recognizing people's inner worlds, then that's more validating. I know in an overall intro to psychology, right? We talk about the presenting issue and like what we're putting forth versus how we're talking about it. So in terms of the fix, it's not what we're discussing, it's how we're discussing it. So I think that's what everyone's kind of mind-blowing or success rate comes, is because of how they're starting to interact with each other versus what they used to do.
And isn't there a piece too around like it's only as effective as the sorry.
Hey, Sophie.
Hi.
I don't want to interrupt Scott, but I'm also like wondering if you ever end up where it's like, both of you probably need to have individual therapy to work on your own things. Because what John, so the way you said that earlier, John, I forget exactly how you said it, like it's none of your business, but like,
Yeah.
Some of it really is your own stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
some of it really is like, no, that is my stuff. I want you to be aware of it, but like I'm working on my stuff, right? Like that's my story that comes into the relationship because we're in a relationship, but is not about you, right? It's because of the way that I was raised or whatever circumstances. I'm curious how that plays out for you, Nat.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because that actually just happened to me last week, where I had an intake with a couple. And immediately, as soon as the husband showed up, he's like, I can't do this. He's like, I need to work on my own shit. He's like, I have issues. My dad was abusive. Like my mom was like messed up. Like I'm messed up. And there was a lack of being able to be committed to couples therapy, because he was like, I'm indecisive towards what I want. If I want to be in this relationship, a different relationship, if I need to be on my own. So I need to resolve that first before I can really dedicate myself to somebody else. And I mean, I agree with that 100%. Couples work is commitment to yourself and the other person. But if you don't know what you want, if you're truly in a place where you're so dysregulated, I mean, you do need to find somewhat of that balance inside to be able to, again, balance with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
What a brave soul to say, I mean, that's a scary thing to say. And that's what I was going to get at before, which is that the therapy or any work you're doing with any practitioner is only as good as what you bring that practitioner, right? I mean, it requires honesty. And even if you don't have the answers to why you behave the way you do, if you're coming in and not willing to say where things are tough and where you get tangled, and then being willing to look at what might be hard to look at as a result of being made more aware, then it's not going to do much good.
Well, I want to be aware.
We talk a lot.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, we talk a lot about trying to save relationships, but if we look at the other end of the spectrum, are there relationships that are unsavable? And are there relationships that you do need to get out of? And how do you address the situation where, because of all of the societal pressures and family pressures and other, fears, some relationships do need to end? And how do you address that in your practice?
I agree. I mean, I think there are some relationships that are just so disruptive, where it's because one partner is just so, I think, severely wounded that they just can't come to a place of forgiveness and moving forward and letting go. A lot of times, unfortunately, when there's personality disorders present, right, where there's manipulation, borderline, narcissism. Narcissism is a big one, where a lot of people find it difficult to be in a relationship with somebody who is unempathetic. So I agree, right? There are tools we can provide, but if the people aren't willing to implement those tools, or again, be open-minded towards their partner, then yeah, I mean, if our safety is at risk, if it becomes to a point where it's abusive, whether it's emotionally, physically, mentally, then absolutely. I mean, I think we also need to put forth what's best for our entirety, right? Our mind, body, soul. If we're truly unhappy, if we feel like we're constantly being wounded, then absolutely, there have been times where I've addressed with a couple, like, you guys really need to readdress if this is productive for you anymore, if this is what you truly want and what you envision, if things are gonna stay somewhat the same over the next 5-10 years.
I'm aware of our time. Are there any other thoughts in a minute that are still lingering? Any little threads hanging out?
I don't know. I was just thinking while you're talking, Nat, this whole concept of in it to win it. Like, are both, I think that's one way to just check that out in one's own relationship is, am I noticing the progress? You know, talk is cheap. Are we actually a different couple now than we were before? Do I see that person doing the work and showing up, wanting to carry this relationship forward? And if you do, then chances are that relationship can be quote unquote saved or go on. And if not, maybe just one of you is in the relationship.
Yeah. Being partners and not enemies.
Okay, you guys. Well, for you watching, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications, and also like our stuff. We need to grow, so we really appreciate you being here. Also, look below at the resources. We're going to provide you with a number of resources, things we've mentioned through this episode today, and then this crew will also provide me cool resources that they thought about that they haven't said anything about between now and when this episode comes out. So check out more coming from Get Centered from the Center for the Healing Arts and Sciences. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Nat. See you guys next time.